Just imagine, there is a place on Earth where year after year, thousands of acres of fertile land vanish beneath the sand right before one's eyes. A place where entire villages, crop fields, and even human lives were slowly succumbing to the encroaching desert. This place is China's Kubuqi Desert. At one time, it wasn't simply called a desert. People referred to it as the Sea of Death because mere survival there was the ultimate battle. Every year, nearly 500,000 acres of land would be buried under sand. Trees would wither, rivers would vanish, and people were forced to abandon their ancestral homes and move elsewhere. The most alarming part was that this desert showed no signs of stopping. In fact, it was expanding further each year. Even experts began to think that perhaps it was no longer possible to halt the desert's advance. But just then, a man made a decision that everyone initially dismissed as madness, and that very act of madness would one day change history. The Kubuqi Desert was not merely a desert. It was a force that was gradually swallowing everything around it. With every storm, millions of tons of sand would blow in and settle over the farmland. Where green crops once swayed, within a few months, nothing remained but mounds of gray sand. Thousands of families were forced to abandon their homes and relocate because there would be no arable land left. China realized that if this desertification wasn't halted, it would eventually engulf vast areas. So, the government launched a series of major projects. Millions of trees were planted. Sand control centers were established. Billions of dollars were invested to halt the desert's expansion. But there was one problem. It seemed as though nature was defeating humanity at every turn. Fierce winds would uproot the newly planted trees. Intense heat would dry up even the slightest moisture in the soil. Most of the trees would die within a few weeks. Efforts continued year after year. But the results were virtually nil. Many began to believe that conquering this desert was impossible. Just then, a businessman came forward with an idea that made everyone laugh. And that man's name was Wang Wenbiao. Wang Wenbiao knew this battle could not be won simply by planting trees. First, he had to halt the shifting sands. For as long as the sand kept blowing, no tree could survive. So, he invested his life savings. He even took out substantial loans. Many said, "This is nothing but a waste of money." But he paid no heed to anyone. He brought over 100 bulldozers and nearly 300 workers into the desert, day after day. Work continued for about 18 hours a day. They began constructing small, square-shaped enclosures on the desert sands using dry brushwood and straw. From a distance, it looked as though a massive chessboard had been laid out across the desert landscape. But this was not merely for decoration. There was science behind each square. These small enclosures served to reduce the speed of the wind. As a result, the sand could no longer blow away as it used to. The sand began to settle, and that was when willow trees were planted in the center of each square. This is no ordinary tree. Its roots can reach deep into the ground to find water. Even in places where other trees cannot survive, the willow strives to endure. But the challenges didn't end there. Planting the trees was easy, but keeping them alive was far more difficult. And in the process of solving that problem, something happened that astonished the entire world. In the next part, you will discover how a tiny rabbit became the hero who turned the desert green. For the first few months after planting the willow trees, there was a glimmer of hope. Some of the trees gradually began to spread their roots. The shifting of the sand also subsided somewhat compared to before. However, another major problem soon emerged. Simply planting willow trees is not enough. They require regular pruning. This is because, without trimming the new shoots, the trees cannot develop strong trunks. Consequently, there is a risk of trees snapping and falling whenever a major storm hits. But across thousands of acres of desert, who would prune the branches of millions of trees? Hiring people for this task would require a massive amount of money, thousands of workers, and years of time. It seemed as though the project, launched with such great effort, might end in failure. Just then, Wang Wenbiao came up with a solution that took many by surprise. He introduced a special breed of rabbit to the desert, the Rex rabbit. At first, no one could quite grasp it. How could a tiny rabbit save a vast desert? But nature itself had an extraordinary plan. Rex rabbits loved nothing more than the tender new shoots of willow trees. As they began to feed on those shoots, the main trunks of the trees grew thicker, stronger, and more resilient. In other words, a task that would have required thousands of workers was being performed daily at no cost by thousands of rabbits. And that was the very moment. when the history of the Kubuqi Desert began to change. But the work of the Rex rabbits wasn't limited to just eating branches. The real change began with something very few people think about. It was their droppings. Although it might sound ordinary, this manure gradually began transforming the lifeless, sandy soil into natural fertilizer. In soil where nothing could once survive, nutrients began to return, but that wasn't all. When Rex rabbits ate various types of grass, many of the seeds were not fully digested in their bodies. After some time, those seeds returned to the soil along with the droppings. And surprisingly, the seeds began to sprout. Where once only vast stretches of sand were visible, small green blades of grass began to emerge. As the grass grew, the soil became firmer. The wind could no longer blow the sand away as easily as before. Moisture within the soil also began to be retained for longer periods. A small change gave rise to another major change. Then another, and yet another. Gradually, a new ecosystem emerged across the desert, where trees, grass, animals, and nature began to work in harmony. Signs of life were returning to the place once known as the Sea of Death, and within just a few years, what had once seemed impossible began to become a reality. In a place where, just a few years ago, one saw only sand and dust storms, a touch of greenery is now gradually returning. The willow trees are growing tall, grass is springing up all around. The soil retains moisture for much longer than before. And the most significant change has occurred in people's lives. Those who had once abandoned their homes out of fear of the desert began to return. This was because the desert was now offering not only a means of survival, but also new avenues for income. Local people were trained in raising Rex rabbits. Gradually, small families established their own farms. The fur of this rabbit was among the most valuable natural furs in the world. A high-quality Rex rabbit pelt would sell for up to around $30 on the international market. Yet, the cost of raising a single rabbit was merely a few dollars. The very animal that was turning the desert green was also becoming a source of income for people. Meanwhile, timber and other raw materials began to be obtained from the maturing willow trees, a project that everyone had once dismissed as madness. That gradually became the livelihood for thousands of people. The Kubuqi Desert was no longer just a desert. It had transformed into an extraordinary example of partnership between nature, technology, and humanity. But Wang Wenbiao's dream did not end there. He undertook a feat in the heart of the desert that captured the attention of not just China, but the entire world. Just a few years ago, vast stretches of Kubuqi were nothing but sand. But now, new life is emerging in that very same place. And right at that moment, Wang Wenbiao took another bold step. He thought, if this desert is filled with the sun's intense heat, why not harness that very energy? This idea sparked a massive project. A huge solar power plant was built in the middle of the desert. Thousands of solar panels were installed across the sea of sand. Viewed from the sky, the entire plant looks like a massive horse galloping across the desert. It was not merely a beautiful design. It was a symbol of the future. This solar plant began generating vast amounts of electricity annually, enough to bring light to the homes of millions of people. But the most surprising thing is, the function of the solar panels was not limited to merely generating electricity. The panels helped reduce wind speed. As a result, the sand could not blow away as easily as before, and shade was created beneath the panels. In a place like the desert, this shade was an invaluable asset. This was because moisture could be retained there for a much longer time. Gradually, grass began to grow in the shade. Then came the small animals, rabbits, sheep, and various birds. A place where, at one time, there was virtually no life. A complete ecosystem began to take shape there once again. It was a scene that no one could have even imagined a few decades ago. Nature and technology are not enemies. Rather, by working together, they can make the impossible possible. The Kubuqi Desert stands as living proof of this. Today, looking at the Kubuqi Desert, it is hard to believe. This is the very place once known as the Sea of Death, where there was nothing but sand. Now, millions of trees stand there. Where people had once given up hope of survival, a new life has begun. Thousands of families have returned to their homes. New employment opportunities have been created. The environment has changed. The economy has changed. And above all, people's beliefs have changed. This success in Kubuqi has not been limited to China alone. Today, many countries around the world are drawing inspiration from this project to combat desertification. Because this story teaches us an important truth. Humans cannot win a war against nature. But working with nature makes the impossible possible. And perhaps that is why Kubuqi's story is not merely a story about a desert. It is a story of human courage, science, and an unwavering refusal to give up. The man whom everyone once called a madman is remembered today as a visionary. Perhaps every major transformation in the world begins with an idea that everyone initially dismisses as impossible. So, if your dream seems impossible to others today, do not stop, because history tells us that those who change the world are initially laughed at by people. Yet later, it is their stories that the world remembers. Extraordinary stories lie hidden in every corner of the world. If you would like to watch more documentaries like this, please subscribe to the channel. In the next episode, we will return with another incredible truth about the world.